You're listening to episode 152 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Elisha Goldstein speaks with us about A Course in Mindful Living. If you're listening to this podcast and find value and insights from what is shared here, know that this is available from your generosity and the generosity of others like you. I want to thank those of you who are making monthly donations to keep this podcast going. And if you're not yet, please take a moment, go to presentmomentmindfulness.com and click on Make a Donation. One-time or especially monthly donations show you value this work, which can't happen without you. Thank you for your help, your support, and your kind generosity. One of the most challenging things for those new to mindfulness practice is that even if you've found and taken a good course from a competent teacher, that ends, and then what? Often there's a difficulty with integrating one's time off the cushion into the rest of daily life. And one of the best ways to do this is through programs that also welcome you into a caring, supportive community. Elisha Goldstein, PhD, co-founded the Center for Mindful Living in Los Angeles, California. He is co-author of A Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Workbook and author of Uncovering Happiness, Overcoming Depression with Mindfulness and Self-Compassion, The Now Effect, How a Mindful Moment Can Change the Rest of Your Life, and Mindfulness Meditations for the Anxious Traveler. He developed the Mindfulness at Work program recognized by the National Business Group on Health for its success in stress management, the Mindful Compassion Cognitive Therapy program, the e-course Basics of Mindfulness Meditation, and co-developed Connecting Adolescents to Learning Mindfulness with his wife, Stephanie Goldstein, PhD. He is a clinical psychologist in private practice in West Los Angeles, California. Our guest today is Elisha Goldstein. Welcome to the podcast. Good to see you.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
And, I've wanted to speak with you for quite some time because you've written many books and have a couple with dear friend Bob Stahl, and so your name has been on my radar for quite some time. And then we had a very unplanned and fortuitous meeting at Mindful Leader Conference a year or so ago. It was just such a nice surprise. I'm so glad to finally be able to bring you on the podcast. Glad you're here. So what I'd like to do is, many audience may not know about you, and so maybe you can spend a little bit of time and tell us about your background.
Okay. I think I came to mindfulness, much like I'm guessing you did or a lot of people did. And that was at a time when, say, I keep with this story, it keeps the years keep getting longer and longer, but this was this was a little over 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, a little bit 20, but something like that, where I was working in San Francisco during the dot-com boom and early on, and it was I was working hard and I was actually really successful at what I was doing, managing sales teams. I was up in San Francisco and um, and I was working hard, but I was also playing a whole lot harder. And that was the reality. And I think I was lost and I was confused, and and my success at the time was kind of clouding over all of that, making it so I couldn't really see that I was actually had a problem at that time. And um, and I went away. I was urged to go away with my family, kind of an intervention, and I went away to it was kind of a Jewish retreat center in Southern California, and called Brandeis Bardeen Institute. And they told me, they said, "Hey, go over there." And I'm like, "Oh, why would I do something like that? I got all this up here." And they said, "If it doesn't work out for you in a day, just don't worry about it. You can leave." I'm like, "Okay." So I go there, and within the first day, I'm there, and within a short period of time, I run into this guy who introduces himself, and because I'm challenging everything there, the prayers, various things like that. And he introduces himself, and he says, "Well, why you seem kind of a little stressed out, and why don't you do something for me? Why don't you try doing something for me? Like I want to just experiment with something." And I'm like, "Okay, whatever." And so he hands me this orange, and he says, "Why don't you just soften your body for a minute, and I want you to kind of bring your senses to this orange for a second." And I'm like, "This is crazy. What the heck is this guy? What is he asking me to do?" And so and I hold the orange, and he asked me to feel it, and just kind of humor me, he says, and I'm sensing into the touch of the orange, the smoothness of it, the opening my eyes to the colors of it and seeing that it's kind of bright. And it wasn't until I started to actually peel it back and I saw the zest pop out of it, something I haven't noticed before really in an orange at that time. I was kind of taken aback and surprised by it. And as I was opening it up, I saw the veins of the orange, and I was really kind of starting to get into it. And um, and then finally, I put this into my mouth, and it just exploded in my mouth. It's exploded, and I had this big smile on my face. I think I might even kind of laughed at that time. And as I was doing that, it was like the best tasting orange I'd ever tasted in my mouth. He said, "Well, how do you feel?" And I said, "Well, I feel good. I feel relaxed." And he said, "Well, what would the days, weeks, and months ahead be like if you had more of this in your life?" And I'm like, "Sign me up. Sounds great." And so that was my introduction really into the experience of mindfulness. I was with through this tasting an orange, and it wasn't and it wasn't that was actually my first introduction to it in some way, because I'd been reading about it for a long time.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of listeners here. There's a lot of people who start off by reading it. There's certainly like a lot of books out there that are really popular that don't actually um, suggest any experience. It's more conceptual, and there's a lot of reading. But that's like our introduction to a sense of feeling more present and intentional in our lives and in the world, and that could be also inspirational. And so the interesting thing about this story is, I go on at this place uh, to really get into it. And I think I was voted most likely to be a rabbi, while I was there. And um, and I go home. I go back to my workplace 30 days later, and I'm there, and I'm wearing, just a side note, that a lot of people don't know, is I go back and I'm wearing these things called tzitzit. And tzitzit are like just this cloth you wear over your body that has these fringes on there, and you see a lot of Orthodox Jews wear this type of stuff, and that the fringes are meant to remind you to do good deeds in the world. And I'm like, that's fantastic. Why wouldn't I wear something that reminds me to do good deeds in the world? Because I was like in that place of like generosity and heart. And so I go to my corporate work environment with this button-down shirt and suit with these seat hanging out outside my pants, and everyone just thinks I'm crazy. And then it took me about 1 week to fall back into my old habits. So there's a real power I later learned behind our environment, and the influence the people we hang around with have on us, and the influence our environment has on us, and how we're like ultimately really interdependent with our environment and the people that we're around. So, but that was a very interesting thing. It took me about a week. However, a deep seed was planted within me, and I had a thirst to kind of learn more. And I decided to go back to school eventually to leave the corporate world and go back for a doctorate program and in psychology in Palo Alto, and that's where I met my wife on the very first day that I was there. So I know that was the right decision. And 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 it was there that I got introduced to this guy named Sri Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Sri Aurobindo was an Eastern teacher at the time, and one of the things we were doing in this class was we were reading really in a contemplative way, and which meant like you read really slowly, which is something was a great gift to me to
Mm.
learn how to read that way, because a lot of us right now, and this is an incredible tip for everyone who's listening right now, and you just see that if you see this in yourself, that there's really great books out there, because there's a lot of great books out there, and we read them, we're reading them, and then after we're done reading them, we just put them back on the shelf. We read it through, put it back on the shelf. What's the next great book out there? And the reality is, to learn how to read slightly slower and take in the pages and even pause, read less, but read slower and contemplate, while you're reading, is going to be so much more powerful. You'll squeeze so much more juice out of the book if you do that. And so that was a great gift to me. But one of the things that I came across as I was doing that was that for him, one of the highest, there was this experience, that he kept coming back to, called the sacred experience. And, it was like this, it was a real high form of living. And I started resonating with that. And I said, wow, I want to learn to have more sacred moments in my life, because thousands, many years from now on my deathbed, hopefully looking back, I'll have, if to be able to live a sacred life will feel so good. And so feel so meaningful. And so I decided, like, I wanted to study how you create sacred moments, and can people actually have more, and can they cultivate more of these in their lives? And I realized, in order to do that, um, you needed to be present and intentional. And I was a doctoral student, and for doctoral students, you need to do research. And so I was like, well, what's out there that will teach us how to be present, that's actually been studied by science right now, so I can like draw on it for this doctoral research paper, which was later, by the way, that whole study that I did there was later published in the Journal of Clinical Psychology. But what I found was it was mindfulness-based stress reduction, which Ted, you're very familiar with. And so, and this wonderful 8-week program, I'm sure all your listeners know about it. And, and I used that, and that's where I met Bob Stahl. And he was the leading teacher in MBSR at the time outside of UMass. And I went through his program, and then became really close to him. And then we connected, and I started getting teacher trained by him. And and that was really the birth of my more formal experience into mindfulness, and the training of it, and the practice of it in everyday life. And then I got really connected with Thich Nhat Hanh. I loved his work, and because that was really about mindful living more than anything I'd found in the past. And from there it just became like my own experience, and the birth of this innate and implicit sense of bringing an intentional sense of bringing presence into my own life, with my difficult emotions, with my joyous emotions, in my relationship with my wife and my kids, in the work I do when I wake up in the morning, before I go to bed, and getting living with the intention of this sacred life.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And interesting your discussion of reading with more intentionality and maybe slowing that down a little bit. I've been rereading Mysterious Island, the old Jules Verne book, for about 3 months now. And I read it a long time ago, and I was like, no, it's time for me to read this again. I have a nice old copy from way back when, and just looking at it and going through that. And it's not necessarily savoring. That's something that does happen, but just being more aware and alert to the way in which even this translation, I don't speak French, of course, this is a translation to English, but just the way it's put together is so lovely, and it's adding on a level of appreciation to the experience, which otherwise would just be cranking through words. And it's a totally different way of engaging with reading a book. So thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. So how this has progressed in your life, and one of the things I want to talk about is you have an upcoming course in mindful living, and I want you to say a bit about that, how it came about, what's there, and just what that looks like, what it's about.
You know, I guess one thing I missed in my whole thing was really my professional experience. But so
Yeah, we should cover
so
that
a,
too.
after I got trained in MBSR, so I started running a lot of these groups. And at Kaiser, I was working at Kaiser, and I brought it to Kaiser, and which is out on the West Coast, which is a big HMO, and it's also in other parts of the country and the United States. And then I started as a psychologist, you know, because I was now a psychologist, I was bringing together elements in cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness, and I was doing that. And then I learned there's this program called MBCT out there. I'm like, oh my God, I've been like doing this thing. Okay, bring it on. So I start doing that and getting connected with Zindel Siegel and who one of the guys who created it, and then got more formally trained in it and started leading those groups and brought those groups to Los Angeles with a friend of mine, Roger Nolan, and and then after leading those groups for a while and getting, you know, always being interested in the science and the research behind all this stuff, because there was so much great science behind the impact of MBSR and a lot of great science that was coming out at the time about the impact of MBCT for you know, reducing relapse into depression, and MBSR reducing anxiety, stress and anxiety, um, and so and for me, just implicitly in my own life, I felt the effects of this stuff, and then, but I couldn't escape, for me, the feeling that people had ultimately at the end of a lot of these 8-week classes, which was, now what? This was so great. I had such a great experience here. Now what? And so here's what the problem was. I discovered, because even the research showed that people's formal practices pretty much went away, and you know, there was lingering impacts, you know, from the program. But the now what? Because what happened was, there's 3 parts that we know of to a successful practice of any kind in our lives, whether you want to exercise or play guitar, or whether you want to learn a spiritual practice or mindfulness practice, whatever. When it comes to habit change, something that's enduring, you need these 3 things. And all the world's wisdoms traditions know about these 3 things. You need the teaching, you need the practice, and the community. And the community is the glue. And that's why with MBSR, while people are like in it, you know, there's a community there that meets week to week. And so people, there's like a glue there. But then after the 8 weeks, now there's some teachers in various places that will keep an ongoing group, so people can, you know, like you have your practice, you have your circles, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You have your
2 groups,
practice,
online and in person. Yeah.
2 groups, online and person, so people can come to you and continue to practice with you and have a space for that. But most do not, right? But they have
Right.
anyone can come get you because they're online. And so these went away. So I thought, in my experience, I said, so where did I like make, if I could surround myself, if people could surround themselves with more people that were inspiring and doing the things they wanted to do, and these people became friends, like real friends, not Facebook friends, but like real friends, then what kind of impact would that have for their ongoing motivation
Mhm.
to bring this, and natural inspiration to bring this into their life? So I decided, like, what we need now is more than just an 8-week program. What we need is like a 6-month program, because within 6 months, I figured you can start making relationships with people if you're connecting with people all along the way. And so I decided to put on a longer, deeper program called A Course in Mindful Living. And A Course in Mindful Living includes all of those elements. It includes science-backed teachings. It includes the practices, the most essential practices, and then some other ones, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then it includes regular live community interaction. It has the 2-dimensional interaction, which you see online or in different places like Facebook, that kind of thing, but it also has live interaction, more Zoom-based interaction. And even from my first, so this is the 5th time we'll be running this program. And from the first program, I still get emails from people that say, we're still meeting together. We're still connected together. You know, these groups of people who met the very first time. And because of that, they're more inspired to continue on the practice. And so that's, to me, what's so powerful, is that I wanted to create a program that had that trifecta, or that trinity, or whatever we want to say, right, of that support experience that creates more enduring change. And that's the impact that we found from this. So we have, I mean, the amount of amount of transformation that comes from people at the end of this program is so powerful and heartwarming. And and then we have a community that continues to meet even after the program's over.
Yeah, because sustainment is quite a problem. It can be very difficult for many people to continue to do a practice after the weekly sessions and here's your home assignments and home practices for you to do. When that's not there, often it can be difficult for folks to continue. Even though we do provide some initial materials and ways for them to do that, I agree. We need more than that as social beings. Having that support of a community can be invaluable. And even though the effects of a program may last and echo throughout their lives, how much better would it be to nourish that, to give it some sunlight and water ongoing?
Yeah, one of the things that I've also felt like, and I am a huge MBSR fan, um, and uh, and one of the things that you can't do as much in the 8 weeks is really teach and train somebody in the fertile elements of practice, which are foundational. So, which to me help support the a deeper practice, and I'll explain what I mean. So, in the beginning of A Course in Mindful Living, what happens is when in our everyday lives, especially today nowadays, we're so addicted to stimulation, and we're so trained around stimulation that our nervous systems are always kind of like, a little bit on edge, like more so I think than the past.
Yep.
And so it's hard to sit and practice like when you're coming from that space. And so we first have to kind of train our bodies and minds into settling a little bit. And it's different than just pure mindfulness. It's actually training the body and mind to release and relax a little bit. And then we also want to train. We also want to train how to do that while being really awake at the same time. So we're not just doing that and falling asleep. And then we also want to train ourselves how to focus, because all of these things really support a strong mindfulness practice. And so in the beginning, the first 6 weeks within A Course in Mindful Living, we're training on these elements. We're kind of like exploring some of the science around like what's the power of kind of getting relaxed, like why wouldn't we want to bring more of this in our lives? And we're kind of doing it together. And then we're starting to weave together. I have this practice called Relax and Awaken. So Relax and Awaken is a practice where we're practicing being relaxed and using our breath to be awake at the same time. So we get this nice balance of being relaxed and awake in life. We do that formally and informally, and then we start kind of layering in and integrating some ways to bring in more concentration, in this. So then what we're doing is I think in a lot of more basic mindfulness programs, what the idea is that we're focusing on something, the mind wanders, take note of that, gently bring it back. And maybe we might even say like take note of where it wandered to, because maybe it's actually an important place where it wandered to. And so then, and in creative meditations, you might take a moment and actually come out and journal that for a second and then come back. But the mind actually wanders to some different places, and the remedies for the wandering mind are different or can be different. So for example, if we're and this is an important teaching, even just from this podcast alone, I think if you listen to this, this is something you can bring into your life that could be really valuable for you. So as an example, the very first thing that we want to do in our daily lives is start to balance our nervous systems a little bit more. And so the easiest way to do that is to notice where your body is bracing. Your body is a barometer, and so it's telling us how we're feeling. And so we can notice where the tensing is, and we can actively soften it. And that's a moment of awareness. So mindfulness, just a noun, right? And then we're actively choosing to soften our bodies or do a gentle stretch or something. And that can be really impactful for lowering your stress, decreasing your muscle tension, getting a better night's sleep if you're not stacking that stress on all over the day. But then if you're feeling really tired, also during the day, you could actually focus a little bit more on your inhalation, while you're doing a practice or even during the day, and bring a little bit more refined focus to the inhalation. And then what that does is that focus brings a certain type of energy. It's as if you're bringing energy into your body, because your breath is energy. Your breath is like nutrients. Without the breath, we wouldn't even be alive. And so every breath, every inhalation is bringing power and nutrients into your body. And if you focus on that, it actually awakens you a little bit more. And so we can use the inhalation to awaken ourselves a little bit more. Um, and, and so we can do these different remedies. So when our mind is wandering in our meditation practice, we can choose to pay a little bit more, just for a short period of time, a little bit more focus on the exhalation to relax if we have a very busy mind. If we're tired, we can do a little bit extra focus on the inhalation to awaken us. And if we're really scattered and all over the place, we can really refine our focus to a particular area of the body, or maybe integrate a little counting, depending on what we're needing, to be able to kind of really focus the mind a little bit more, then let that go. And so these little remedies are really powerful. And then we can launch off into a mindfulness practice, with these remedies of how to work with the wandering mind.
Yeah, what I like about what you're describing is in programs like MBSR, as an example, knowing there are lots of others, is that we have a constraint. It's 8 weeks. And the ability to really go in depth and build that kind of framework that you're describing, where it's not just one thing, it's not just mindfulness of breath, but there are different ways in which we might apply that to different situations. And that depends on checking in. How are we doing right now? And just that initial, how am I doing, is so often left out of programs that uh, may not have the bandwidth to address that. And especially, I think about weekend introductions where it's just a taster, and we need to take
Yeah.
that as such. That it's not, and know that it's not able to take on, nor is it intending to take on the full breadth. I also like that you mentioned the different kinds of thoughts that come up, that they have different ways of working with them. When we think about cognitive distortions and just how what we do when catastrophizing is present is going to be different than when we run into blaming or black and white thinking, or different distortions that are going on. That's not just one thing, notice the thought and forget, well, how do we interact with the thought in a way that might be helpful and supportive to us?
Yeah. Are there nuanced ways? And then a power. Imagine if you were in a group of people who are doing that, and you can share your learning with them, and they could share their learning with you. And then you can get inspired by their experience and maybe even try on something that they're noting for themselves. And then the shared learning can become so powerful. I think one of the issues we have also in that's what's powerful in MBSR, I think, as well, is, while it's going on during those 8 weeks, there's a lot of sharing that happens in the group, and people are listening to other people, and they're learning from other people's experiences, not just their own. And when we're just listening to a meditation via an app, or we're just, reading a book, or we're just doing that, and we're not hanging around other people in some way, then we're missing out on something that's maybe the most powerful part of the experience, which is the shared learning that goes on. And that was something that I really wanted to make sure was an integral part in a course of mindful living, was that shared learning aspect. Because if it's just top down, if it's just the teacher to the students, then yeah, you're missing a huge part of the learning experience.
So I understand you have one course coming up soon in the course of mindful living. Tell us a little bit about that and how people can find out more.
So you can just go to right now. We're going to be focused even more specifically on it starting March 5th. And right now there's a page up called just a course in mindfulliving.com. And if you want to be one of the first people to kind of hear about it, you can sign up for the wait list there. We're going to be giving away a number of things prior to it going up. I'm going to do like a whole mini course almost that people will get, the kind of whether they sign up, whether they end up coming into the course or not, they'll get that if they're part of that wait list. And then there's going to be registration that's going to open around the 16th, I think, and the course is going to start officially on the 25th. And on the 25th will be the day that there'll be a live event with me, and I'm going to be bringing people in and welcoming people, and orienting everyone into their first day together over the 6-month journey together. And I'm going to be live in that course with everyone. I'll be with everyone every other week, live events, and there'll be mindful living practice circles that'll be happening. That'll be hosted by past graduates. And it's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun. We have meditation challenges throughout the program, and just for fun, we have partnerships with a variety of organizations, and we have prizes that people get. It's nothing wrong with a little explicit motivation, or extrinsic motivation. But that's just actually just for fun, like Zafu cushions and,
Yeah.
various things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And once the course is complete, there's a community for people to continue to be part of.
Yeah. So there's, professionals have the opportunity to get up to 24 Cs for taking the course too. And once it's complete, we have a whole mindful living collective. And these groups, these ongoing live groups, are going to continue ongoing within this collective area. And graduates will get their certificate of completion, but will also continue to have access to these circles, because it's our greatest intention to create ongoing practice, ongoing change, ongoing transformation in people's lives, to help people really step up into their true self, and move beyond the hindrances that are there, or overcome them anyway. Yeah.
Right. So for people listening to the podcast, I'll have a link to that on the episode page. And we're going to keep talking. Normally, I don't say that until the end of the episode, but we got a few more things we're going to be chatting about. Uh, Another thing that we'll get to in a little bit, and I want to finish up with, is a retreat you have coming up. So we'll bring that up at the end. But I also want to unpack some other issues of what you and other mindfulness teachers are seeing uh, as how things are going in mindfulness today. And I wanted to ask you about what some of the challenges you might see facing mindfulness today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen this evolution happen over time. I remember in 2000, around 2000, I remember 2002, I remember turning to my future wife, Stephanie, at the time, and saying like, wow, this, this, this mindfulness thing, it's really, I feel like there's something big is going to happen, in this area. Just feels like, I think on the wing, the wings of yoga had really taken off, and I'm like, this next wave that's going to happen. And I'll never forget when Bob Stahl and I published our first book, a mindfulness-based stress reduction workbook, and I remember walking into New Harbinger, which is the publisher, and on the walls of New Harbinger, they had the covers to their next like 15 books, and they were just sitting on the walls in 8.5 by 11 pages, and it was all mindfulness, everything. And I'm like, you guys have just ruined it. It's over. I'm like, this was like in 2000, what? I don't know. Oh, this was a while ago. This was like 2012 or something like that. I
Yeah.
don't know. And I'm like, you guys have just kind of totally ruined it. And little did I know that there was just wave after wave to come,
Yeah.
as it turned out, because there's more and more science coming out, and more sectors were starting to come out. More and more entrepreneurs were coming out, bringing into these variety of sectors, from mindful schools into the schools, to a variety of people into the corporate world, to people starting to bring in medicine. And all of a sudden these sectors started lighting up with fertile grounds to bring mindfulness in, so it started spreading. And then there was objections to it that started to come up in the uh, the media, and some of it was fairly accurate, meaning that there was just this over glorification of mindfulness as a panacea, and
Okay.
you started seeing all these, young, white, beautiful women on the front of
Time
covers,
magazine
and
covers. Yep.
whitewashing the whole thing, and making, certainly people of color feel like, I don't belong in this type of thing, or maybe, and
Right.
so that had to be remediated, over time too, because that it wasn't skillful and accurate, and so that created this backlash. And
Right.
part of the backlash was appropriate, and some of it went a little too far, and so meaning saying like that mindfulness itself, and the way that it is, and the secularized form of it, was a Mick mindfulness, and it didn't. There was really diminishing any value to it, really, in a lot of
Right.
ways.
Right.
And and Ron Purser would have his own arguments around that, and uh, and then I started seeing something else started happening. I started seeing all these meditation centers popping up, these secular meditation centers popping up, unplugged meditation here in LA, and a variety out in New York. And then I was called by one gentleman saying, hey, I want you to help me spread 300 different meditation centers around the United States, and I'm like, wow, how would you even manage that? And then I saw this explosion. But what I started seeing in the meditation centers wasn't that initially it was like an interest in mindfulness. And then it turned from an interest in mindfulness to just an interest in meditation and an interest in a variety of meditations out there. I'm
Mhm.
like, oh my God. So mindfulness was like this wave, but now it's changed from mindfulness being the wave to meditation being the wave, the current wave. So meditation could be a variety of meditations, like crystal meditation to imagining yourself in the future, and successful meditation to the real buzz around sound baths and the experience of that. And so now these meditation centers really kind of have a variety of different types of classes and that are attractive. So the idea, because they're businesses, they need to figure out what's the most attractive class, and that's going to bring in the people, and those are the ones we're going to keep. And that's kind of in some ways where I've seen that it's gone right now, is more in that direction. And MBSR was the really the impetus, and had the science behind it, really. And so there was a lot of integrity to it. And all these other meditations, there's no more science, there's not really science around any of them,
Right.
but they make people feel good, and they could be a benefit. If something's good in somebody's life, then it could be good. But I have people that I know who are clients that go to some of these places, and they say, like, you know what, this class didn't feel good to me, and so I'm not going to go here anymore. And so the idea is, if it doesn't feel good, that's not what this place is about. This meditation center is about feeling good, not about transforming your life, but about feeling good. And so that's less transformative and less meaningful and purposeful to me than and less in line with, like, really as being as impactful in healing this world, healing people's lives in this world, and transforming this world, which is more in line with what I would like to, move in the direction of. So anyway,
Yeah,
for what
I'm,
it's worth.
I'm I'm with you on that, and I think that much as I often quite quite openly disagree with our friend Ron Purser, whom I admire and respect, and in many ways, Ron and I are
Sure.
right in alignment on our social views and certainly how we feel about dogs. We love them. And David Forbes, his colleague in this, has been a guest on this podcast, and Ron has an open invitation to return because I do want to speak with him again here. He has been on my other podcast, and they bring up points that help keep us honest.
Uh-huh.
They
Yeah.
do bring up similar things to what you are. Is that, well, our view of mindfulness is not one where it's a feel good kind of thing. It may be that may occur, but it's not our particular way of engaging with it, and it can be challenging. And I agree with you. This is, and make this clear in classes as you do as well, is that this is not a cure-all. There are reasons why we do speak with participants who want to come into programs. Is this the right time for you? What's going on? I had one of those interviews just this morning with someone who's applied for my MBSR course, just to make sure that they've got the support they need for what the conditions are in their life.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is that I'm very interested in, I expect you may be as well, is ways in which the public might have an easier, clearer insight into, how can I tell? How do I check out this teacher and know that this is someone who has training and credentials that are in alignment with what I'm looking for? And if what you're looking for is feel good or relaxation or something like that, there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. That's not quite what I do in an MBSR course, for example. If you're going to be
Right.
challenged, there are going to be difficulties that you work with. So one of the things I would be interested in seeing is some form of uh, whether it's credentialing or licensure or something in which the public can see, when you go to a therapist, that they've done their time, they've got their bona fides on the wall, and that can be easily looked at. And we don't have something like that for mindfulness. So
UCLA tried to do that, tried to create a governing body. I don't know if you remember this, but it tried to create a governing body, and they got a lot of backlash from a lot of teachers
Yep.
for that because no one wanted anyone to tell them what was right or not about the way that they did that they taught or that they were credentialed or anything like that. There was a backlash to it, and
Was this
I think
was this
it got.
UCLA's, or was this another organization that's still running, trying to do
It was
that?
some well, it was some people from I know
Okay.
exactly,
Yeah.
particularly some people from UCLA.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't UCLA's brand that actually did it. I'm not sure, but certainly some
It
people from
it wasn't their brand. It was people
wasn't their product. Yeah.
went in
Okay.
their organization. I'm familiar with what, and there are particular reasons we're not explicitly naming this, is we're not here to screw with anyone else's work. That's not the idea of this podcast, and not something we want to
Yeah.
do. And I was one of those teachers who pushed back on that.
Oh,
And
there
very
it is.
recently,
Okay.
again, just had a conversation with one of their leaders about, well, here's what I find problematic about this.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And what I'm more interested in is something along the lines of what we have for example, teachers, K through 12, where you have a teachers association by which those who are there adhere to certain things that we can all agree on, ethics around this, and that you have a certain amount of training, and it's not you have to go to this particular place. Don't want it to be that. We're not
Yeah.
about bolstering institutions, but making sure the people who are teaching our kids have had adequate training to do so. And
Right.
we have the same kind of thing in different fields like psychiatry or psychologists or social workers, but we don't have that in mindfulness. And so I'm
Now
very
what about
interested in seeing something come out of that in hopefully the near future.
this? And this is just something to noodle on, which is actually kind of interesting, but it's also worth kind of attending to the dangers of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is sometimes some therapists are not the best, like people of service for people, and sometimes people with less formal training are like the best.
Absolutely.
So it's actually kind of interesting, and so it's interesting, um, to think about. It's such a nuance to who's who's the best mindful service provider, for
Yeah.
who, and and how you really kind of do that. But it would be nice to have some space that says, like, there's some audit, and said, like, yeah, you're a credentialed teacher, and so some people can't, and some people might opt out and say, like, I don't want to be a part of that credentialed teacher thing, but people can, physicians and psychologists, and different people, like, say, I feel safe sending you to this site to get a
Right.
teacher like over here.
Right. Yeah, and there's a couple thoughts on that, because yes, somewhere in the world is the worst doctor. And I don't remember which comedian said, and someone has an appointment with them tomorrow.
Uh-huh.
Remember who it was, and that's the case. But I also know that
Yep.
for that one bad doctor, there are also a bunch of people who never even made it to pass to get that doctor credential. And that's, it's not going to be a perfect solution. But I do want to prevent those folks who should never even get to the point of having a
Yeah.
stethoscope, and it does help with that. And I will say that in other countries, there is that, you need to be in this organization which does the vetting of credentialing, or they're not going to get listed. And at the same time, kind of counter to that, is similar to what you brought up, is that whatever those guidelines or whatever the metrics are, that they be appropriate ones. I know the Center for Mindfulness once upon a time was flirting with the idea of you have to have a master's degree before you can go forward and become a certified MBSR teacher.
Whoa,
I
man, that's just
raised
getting more and more strict.
I raised my hand. This is at the Tools program with John and Saki.
Yeah.
I raised my hand, stood up. There's like 200 people in the room at this 7-day retreat. I said, let me make sure I understand this. I've got 20 years of teaching contemplative practices, but that person who has a master's degree in animal husbandry and no experience they're flagged as yes to go on the teacher training pathway, but I'm not because I didn't decide to get a checkbox in a particular degree. And it went no further that night because a whole
Oh
bunch of
yeah,
people stood up and said, yeah, that's not quite what lends itself to this
it's a
particular content.
very privileged lens
Yeah. Yeah.
too, which is interesting. That yeah,
And from a medical school, I can understand but
uh-huh,
where that might
yeah,
come from. And it's that's one of the things that's necessary in these discussions is okay, so it's not just how might it work. That's great. We need to think about that too. But also, how might it not work? What are things that aren't going to be quite a good fit for this? So
yeah.
yeah,
I,
thank
I
you
would
for
say,
your insights on that.
yeah, I would say to someone if they, if they're, looking for, to really kind of even, if there's different people on who who are, I'm guessing a range of different levels of practitioners who are listening right now. And if you're in the range, different things are going to be supportive to you. And if you're already a longtime practitioner, then you can see probably there's people in your life that you're connected with regularly that are also practicing together. But we can just kind of look at some of the science as a guide, I think. Mishi Jha's done her research
Yeah,
that's shown that you do 12 minutes a day, 12 minutes a day of practice can be really impactful for you. But you can just follow these things as like kind of guidelines and try them out, try them out for yourself. If you spend, 30 minutes, in practice and meditation, there's a variety of different studies that show that can have a real impact on your level of stress and anxiety, and increases in a variety of scales of psychological well-being. And so we can kind of use that in some ways as a guide. I know in my own life, a regular practice for me has unlocked the ability to be able to relate to my difficult emotions differently, difficult emotions that have been with me since childhood. Different forms of sadness or grief, or even my anxiety. I used to struggle terribly with insomnia, in college, and even after college, like a series of panic attacks. I didn't even know what they were, like, initially. But this particular thing over time has really kind of squashed that, because this inner level of confidence that I've been able to build, this just inner knowing, this implicit knowing that, oh, okay, I know what this is. This is my nervous system. If I relate to it in this particular way, soften my body, relate to this particular way. If I stay the course, even though my mind's telling me this isn't going to work, and I stay the course, this starts to settle things down. And how do I know that? Because I've had a certain level of practice and repetition over time.
yeah,
And not only the science backs it up, that's helpful. The neuroscience backs it up, that's helpful. But I've had a certain level of practice over time. And I will say, probably one of the number one things that has really helped me, I'm so lucky because I have a wife who's also in this field. I'm so lucky because fortunate because I've surrounded myself by all kinds of people that I'm in touch with on a regular basis who are working this way. So I'm like naturally inspired to do this work. But if you follow that kind of Marie Kondo, if you're familiar with that Marie Kondo, the magic of tidying up, where she says your environment really impacts you. If you believe in the science of interdependence, then you'll also know that if you can kind of put things in your environment to surround yourself with those things, it's going to give you a real leg up on the level of impact, um, in your life and in your practice.
what I find so fascinating about the way you've described it, which is how you teach, how I teach, others that we know, I teach, everyone I know teaches in the way that you describe, is that we're part of our environment. We're an interactive part of it. We're an integral part of it and inseparable from it. And on the critic side, I hear what I feel is mischaracterization, what we do uh, as removal of pulling away from experience and being part of the world. And that's to me not what we're doing. That it's not a separation; it's an engagement with, knowing that there may be difficulties that come up too. And what you described to me as a process of engagement, not separation. So I'm wondering if you've run into this yourself and how you might respond to that.
Here's the only thing that comes up when I hear you talk about that is I think of, I'm blanking on his name right now. A longtime Zen priest. He was also a professor. I used to talk about him quite a bit, and I haven't for a while, and I've forgotten his name. It's already happening in my aging. And And you know, where he discovered that he was using his breath to avoid what was there,
Mm.
these difficult feelings from his childhood. And it wasn't until he went back to therapy that this came up and he had this realization and insight. And he'd been practicing for decades.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's what you mean by that. I don't know if that's exactly what you mean by that, but I do want to bring up that you can use your meditation practice to avoid what's here as a distraction and not moving through it. But that's not what mindfulness teaches at all. Secular mindfulness doesn't teach that at all. It teaches to be aware of what's here and to relate to it differently. The whole field and success around the field of self-compassion was born, you know, with the foundation of the field of mindfulness. And first you have to recognize what's here, and then you can learn to relate to it and incline to support yourself. And there's some particular algorithms and skills that you can learn and get better at in order to do that. But I have a feeling you were meaning something else, Ted.
I can give you an exact quote. This is from a paper that I was asked to take a look at. That's pre-published in a science journal, which was disturbing on a whole separate level. The phrase was, they were talking about secular mindfulness programs, and the term used is about secular mindfulness programs that they valorize disengagement from challenging experiences rather than conscious engagement with experience.
Yeah, I have no idea what they're talking about.
That's not what we do. That's the exact opposite. What we
I
do.
just
So
don't know. The only reason I can think that would come up is if somebody who was teaching it called it mindfulness and was just teaching focusing on breath
right.
to calm down, and that was the whole mindfulness experience, and that's all they caught, and they said, look at that, it's just to distract yourself with your breath, and then the rest of it doesn't matter. But that's certainly a missing like a large piece of the pie there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, probably like the whole crust, the
The
whole body of
whole
the
no
pie,
I mean
all the good juicy stuff. That's
Yeah,
all
everything.
there.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tool. Yeah, that's a tool, you know, awareness of the breath, but I mean like awareness of everything.
Great.
Like we teach, you were gonna mention this family retreat we teach. And
I was
one
just
of
going
the
to
things
ask
that's
about
so
that. Let's do that
one of the
right
things
now. We'll
well,
lead
one of
into
the things, the only reason I bring it up, and we just did a great article, my wife and I wrote a great article in mindful.org called 7 Things Mindful Families Do Differently. But the one of the a whole day that we do there is around um, mindfulness of emotions, and also the relational mindfulness around communication. Because being able to, a huge part of mindfulness is being aware of what's here, aware of how I'm feeling, also aware of what I'm needing, and then, you know, in that moment, and that helps us really balance. A huge part of the way that, you know, when I teach any of this work is like, especially as a psychologist, is this awareness of how you're like, what would your life be like if you were more aware of how you were feeling, and then because of that you're more aware of what you were needing, and then you were able to give yourself what you were needing in that moment. That would like balance your nervous system on a regular basis.
right.
So in your relationships, it's the exact same thing with your partners, with your kids, or with your parents, whatever it is. If you're aware and can see for a second, you know, also how they're feeling, maybe, and how they could communicate that, and then maybe what they might be needing, then you can begin to relate to them with more intention and consciousness, and you'll have a stronger connection with them. And with families, you know, that's something that we just don't learn, that
Yeah.
level of social and emotional learning and intelligence. And so there's a whole really day that we kind of spend on that, you know. And I always say with this particular retreat that you know, the parents come in because they want to learn mindfulness. They want their kids to learn mindfulness. This is gonna be really great for our family to learn mindfulness. And what they inevitably learn how to do is play again, which is a really important thread to me in mindfulness and being happy, is learning how to play. And the kids come in, they're like, oh, we're gonna zip line, and we're gonna go to the beach, and we're gonna, you know, do this type of stuff, which is super cool. We're gonna paddleboard down mangroves, which is all stuff that we do. And
Yeah.
then they learn mindfulness and compassion while they're there. And the whole family leaves feeling connected. One kid said, I'll never forget this, in one of our early retreats, he said, wow, and he was from Utah, and so he wasn't from California. He goes, that beats our trip to, or that's on par with our trip, or beats our trip to Disneyland and Legoland. And I was like, that's a huge compliment from a 10-year-old. That was a huge compliment. So it's one of our favorite things to do, and we're going to be at the most epic retreat center, in Costa Rica. It's so beautiful, and we have there's nothing like learning and practicing together with like-minded families when it's about bringing mindfulness into your family, and you're really giving the greatest gift to your kids, because you're giving them these resources and learnings and support that's gonna support and impact them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. So for people who want to find out more about that one, where should they go?
So for that one, you can go to a couple places. One is mindfullivingla.org. That's our Center for Mindful Living in Los Angeles. So if you go to mindfullivingla.org and you go under retreats, it'll be right there. Or you can just Google Imiloa Institute Mindful Family Retreat, and it'll be the first thing that pops up under Google. So there's Imiloa's IMILOA Institute, and just type in family retreat, and it'll be the first thing that pops up for you in Google. And then what happens is, if you're interested, I mean, we have 2 to 3 family spots left right now. And if you're interested and you have kids that are 8 or older, then just go to there and click the apply button, and you'll fill out something that'll take you about a minute to fill out, and then we'll set up a call with you, and we can decide whether it's a great fit.
Thank you so much. Well, our guest today has been Elisha Goldstein. I'll include links to several of his books, websites that we've been talking about here today. Elisha, thanks for being here. Good speaking with you.
Okay, great. Pleasure, Ted. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come and visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.